They put a complete ban on Airbnb for Nashville, and that ruined people because that was some of their only income. How do you go about fixing something like this?
It reminded me of a book by Leonard Read called One Economics, Many Recipes. They created a special export zone, and they said they were trying to increase women's labor supply. And in that export zone, politically, in order to get the export zone, they'd say, this will only women can work in the export zone, because politically, that made male voters okay with it. And over time, women became a large enough economic force that changed all policy. A little bittersweet here because unfortunately I have to leave right after this, so I'm sorry I won't be able to join you the rest of the week. Anyway, this is a talk. I was asked to talk on emergent and spontaneous order, and this is in some ways a basic, but I think profound talk when you think about, like many basic things, the consistent application of it. And I'll try to tie it into business at the end. But if not, we can talk about, personal improvement things during the Q&A. Okay. How many of you read iPencil? If you haven't, you need to. I see a few hands on up. So this is the beginning of this talk's iPencil. But I want to highlight some things as I go along. So this is a standard number 2 pencil that nobody uses anymore. They only use mechanical pencils. But, I do think it's interesting to walk through all the various things that go into a pencil, especially as you think about, I find the hardest thing, like, what are we doing in business schools? It's my job, and I have a hard time articulating that. I know we do the things that people have done forever, but like really, what are we doing to transform people or advance them on their career path or their life path? Or are we just collecting money? And I think the best version of what we're doing is exposing them to things that make them say like, hey, I want to try that on. Or that's the type, I don't know what I like, but I know I don't like that. And so many business schools want to start entrepreneurship. We have an entrepreneurship major. And I wrestle with that. Because if you're thinking of entrepreneurship as like consulting, kind of, that's fine. But you have to like know something about the world or be attuned to things to actually have an idea that will provide value in most cases. And most 18-year-olds, most 30-year-olds haven't seen enough where you're like, man, this is a problem and I have something to fix it. And so think about, as we go through this, what were the problems or the opportunities that somebody saw? Sometimes that's in the forefront, sometimes it's in the back. It's okay. So, decide to make your pencil out of California incense cedar. Right? You pay the owner for the right to cut the tree. You're ready to go. How are you going to cut down the tree? What is the slope of the land it's on? If it's too steep, it's going to be old school, a guy with a chainsaw. If it's flat, you have something called feller bunchers. Feller bunchers are basically, it looks like something out of Alien. Right? Remember that big thing with Alien with the metal arms? Feller bunchers, literally, arms come out. There's usually a guy, sometimes a woman in the cab, closes the arms around the tree. A big circular saw shoots out, cuts it at the base. It's very bottom heavy, so you just twist the arms and it lays it down. And then somebody else comes. So somebody saw like, hey, a person with a chainsaw, both for liability reasons, but efficiency reasons, probably isn't the best way to do that. And so you do see a lot of that, still depending on terrain, but a lot of substitution of capital, right? So that was a real innovation. Okay, you need a sawmill. So you mill down the tree. How precise should you be? Greater precision usually means you're slower. Time is money. But the faster you go, the more waste you have. There's some optimal ratio there. I don't know. You've got to figure that out. I spent a summer, which I recommend everybody do, working in a plastics factory or any type of factory. I learned lots of things. I learned lots of things about people who work in plastics factories, but I also learned what I don't like about bosses. And one of the interesting things was most of the people working in the plant were very hard workers, but were not literate. They were very smart because you had to do a test that's mostly outlawed or not used now because of a Supreme Court case called Griggs v. Duke Power that says any test you use for employment can't have disparate impact. It has to be designed specifically for that task. Well, they invested the money to find a test that would specifically for their task. But basically, it was kind of like a Rube Goldberg exam. If you don't know what I mean by Rube Goldberg, it's like there's a chain of events, right? You've seen these videos on TikTok or Reels where like a marble's dropped and then it does all these things. It was like that. Can you follow a logical chain of events? Because if I pull this lever here, that thing over there is going to drop on somebody's head. And so you need to like understand cause and effect. And they were great at that because of the testing, but many of them were not literate. And that was not necessary for most of the jobs. But for some of the jobs, you had to read a bill of ladling because we had 14 different types of pallets. Pallets are those wooden things, right? You put stuff on, and customers have different requirements. Well, what happens if you put it on the wrong pallet? It won't fit on the customer's shelf. They send it back to be repackaged. We had a warehouse floor that was 4 times this room. That was stuff that had been sent back. And so myself as an intern, in and around everything else I was doing, I took it upon myself to put stuff on the right pallets. And anyway, long story short, at the end of the summer, in my 10 weeks, my back's killing me because I'm actually working for a living. I worked 4 12-hour shifts, and my back's killing me. And so like I'm laying on the ground waiting for this thing to finish, and I'm trying to crack my back. And the foreman comes over and yells at me. And I said, you know, I couldn't do this if I hadn't emptied this room, which was the wrong thing to say. If I had taken lessons from Alexander, I would not have said that. But it proved to me that I wanted to be in an environment that was based on productivity, not on arbitrary, rules, right? And that's a prime reason why you need to do things. And I tell students, you need to get an internship. And you're like, well, I don't know if I want to work in that. That's a great way to find out, is to go do it. Okay. What happened here? Sorry. Okay, don't forget to kiln dry your precision cut wood. You ever get a pencil that's not straight? I have. That's because they didn't kiln dry it. Try to save a little bit by not kiln drying it. Got to come up with a kiln drying machine, probably an energy efficient one. Put all your little pieces of wood in. Okay, apparently every time. Sorry about that. Something's not. Okay, lacquer. That yellow, sorry, I don't know what is up with I'm having the same problem Pete was having. It is, I am scrolling down. Wait, where is there it is. Yeah. There we go, okay, thank you. I didn't realize it was off on that side. So the yellow part's lacquer, originally made in India and China from the rust tree or squeezed from bugs. Today it's made in factories from chemicals. Luckily, thanks to previous generations, we don't have to use the squeezing bug method. Okay, got to choose your color of lacquer. Why yellow? Well, in late 1800s, the highest quality deposits of graphite, which are used in pencils, were found by a Frenchman exploring Siberia near the border of China. Pencils made with that graphite were best, and yellow in China is associated with royalty, so the pencils were colored yellow as a symbol of high quality. So if you ever wondered why most pencils are yellow, it goes back a couple centuries. Maybe you want to put your company's name on the pencil, or you want to sell customized pencils to groups, or if you're like me, a person of a certain era, the coolest thing on the schoolyard were those NFL pencils. You could buy them in a box, it had every NFL team on them. This machine right here will do that. I'm sure you can figure out how to build it. Let's move on to some more technical stuff. Okay, this is the pencil's, as we say, lead, which is actually a mixture of graphite and clay. What's a number two? Number two is how hard that mixture of graphite and clay is. You can get 1, 3, 2.5. I had a friend in high school who wanted to be a comic book artist, never go to art school. I apologize. Like, you want to be an artist, just do art. Art schools will put you in debt. Just look at the debt numbers for people who can't pay their college loans back. He did 1 year but he had every single type. This was the first time I found out about different numbers. Are your pencils going to have plugs? Okay, that's what we call erasers in the United States, but technically they're called plugs. Europeans here might know they're not standard. You have separate plugs or erasers. They're made of synthetic rubber or vinyl, so got to make an extruder. I don't know about you. I can't stand untumbled erasers or plugs. I need those rounded edges at the top of my, something about it, it erases better. Like, it's crazy when you think about it, like there's a market for that fine detail. But I'll tell you, I do not buy the unrounded edges. And there is a company out there. So again, think about, you have to know and understand this product. There's a company that makes tumblers for erasers to round off the edges. There are so many different market niches in our society, but you have to be attuned to that. You have to have the right incentives. And again, this is why it's hard to teach entrepreneurship in business schools. How are you going to attach the plug? A ferrule. Of course. We all know what that was. It's primarily zinc or copper, although copper, because relative prices, is going down considerably. You see that a lot less. Typically, it's historically done with glue. If you've ever had the ferrule come off, that's usually because the glue has gone old. But now there's something called ultrasonic welding that occurs. You'll probably go with tradition. It's a little easier. Maybe you don't have enough capital to invest to use ultrasonic welding. Okay, so we've made a pencil. All you have to do is figure out how to make some boxes to store them in, boxes to ship them in, get them to trucks, distribute them to stores, market, everything else. So this is essentially Leonard Read's iPencil with a little bit of commentary thrown in. To me, this highlights two things. One, the knowledge problem, right? And in some sense, how we are standing on the shoulders of millions of people in the past, and may seem mundane, but like if you think about all the little things in life that, the marvels that make our lives better, that are somebody who just wasn't satisfied with the way things operated and found a way to make things slightly better. That's a great way to benefit yourself while creating value for others. So we've talked a lot, as I said yesterday in my talk. What was interesting is a lot of those firms were like, hey, we're going to do bottom up. So where does order come from? Sometimes it comes from the top down. Families tend to be top down. You can think about the authoritarian parents. I used to pat myself on the back as a non-authoritarian parent. I'm a big believer in Montessori. You give broad guideposts. And, freedom, responsibility. Oh, you don't want to go a coat? 32 degrees out? Okay. I'm not driving back. So, and I thought, man, great. Until my kid told me the other day, like, Dad, that gives me so much anxiety because that's a lot, you put a lot on us as kids. Like, we had to live up to our choices. I'm like, I was hoping to make you more responsible, self-actualized adult. He's like, yes, but that's hard. And I was like, right, it is hard. And I'm not trying to belittle, let me be clear, I'm not belittling his feelings there, because I think that's the thing a lot of young people feel nowadays, is there's a lot of weight on them individually to be successful. The narrative they hear in the media is it's harder than ever, right? Rents and everything else. But also like society. You're young, I guess you want to change things. And what do you hear? It's climate change, it's everything else. Like I can see where if you're attuned and aware, you'd infer the wrong things from that. So these social institutions like families, firms, sports teams, these are what we call made orders, right? Think about all three of those firms we talked about yesterday. There was a vision. There was an entrepreneur who brought everything together. Here is the purpose. If you want to be self-managed, come work for Morningstar, Tomato Company. We're going to agree upon that because you're going to have this contract that says, like, I agree on it. Right? So there is a we there. So spontaneous orders are collections of made orders, or in Hayek's words, they're products of human action, but not human design. Many practices and institutions arise through a process of social evolution. Money, language, markets. Sometimes there are attempts, right? And so you might look and say, well, look, we have dictionaries, right? We have, there's Esperanto. Anybody know what Esperanto is, right? It's a made up, invented language. There's Klingon, right? But nobody can stop. Merriam-Webster adds words to the dictionary because language is evolving. Except for that one terrible William Shatner movie in Esperanto, I've never seen anybody ever talk about it. Law, even in common law countries, law is evolving. If you ever have a chance to see a gentleman named John Hasness talk, he's one of the best lecturers I've ever seen, and he does this great talk on the myth of the rule of law. And I will just say, for somebody like me who thought, I love go to talks and be convinced I'm wrong, I've never seen more people come in, agree, thinking one thing and leave changing it. And that's a darn good lecturer. But there's no purpose with spontaneous orders other than be a process by which all the multiple purposes of the people involved in the action can be fulfilled, right? Think about Alexander's talk, right? Hey, we might have things in common. We have different goals and purposes in life. This might be one small node in which we both can interact, okay? But if it doesn't work for that purpose, it's going to go away. Okay, so let's think about order in the market. Okay, we have made orders, they make their plans, I need a pencil, I got a big test coming in, Scantron, I know that it won't read the number 3, it only reads number 2. These are the intentions of these firms, individuals, households. It's as our plans and attentions come together with the plans of others that we get Adam Smith's invisible hand. Right? So the individual who goes and cuts down trees, or decides to make a better, or invents the mechanical pencil. We benefit each other without directly intending to. Okay, I'm not going to read that. You should go read Smith if you haven't read Smith. Not everything in Smith. I'm going to say a statement that somebody else, not because it's wrong, it's just, it's long. And there's a lot of like counting of prices, right? I used to work, when I worked for the Joint Economic Committee, I worked for two, I won't say what denominations, but two extremely religious guys. And one was saving up, he was working the job to save to go to seminary. And the biggest fight we ever had in the office was the one very religious guy, but he was an economist, said to the guy who was saying seminary, he was like, look, and again, please take no offense at this, but I'm just quoting what he said. He said, look, the Bible could have used an editor. And the guy who was going to seminary was like, how can you say that's the word? He's like, look, I'm just saying, if you were writing a book that was telling these stories, even if you're, like, you would have put some of the things in an appendix. They wouldn't be in the main part, right? All the begatting, and anyway, so like, when I say this was a huge fight, that was like 4 or 5 hours. My boss had to come out and tell them to knock it off because he could hear it through the walls. There's parts of The Wealth of Nations that I find that way, where Smith's talking about silver prices. But there is so much that you could put an entire, I mean, really profound. So he generally indeed neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. Okay? By directing that industry in such a manner as approves me of his greatest value, he intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an indivisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Okay? And I think this, by pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than he really intends to promote it. I think about this quite a bit. I serve on the Main Street Morgantown Economic Development Board. And as someone who doesn't believe a lot in planning, there's a lot of planning on that board, at least mindset. And what I try to think of is, I try to focus on the infrastructure around things, the ways to make it easier for businesses to start, those sorts of obstacles. Okay. One of the great things is we don't need to know people in the market. If we want to, that's great. But we don't need to know. I don't need to know Ralph Lauren to get some polo stuff. I have money. There's storefronts. But we all are coming together to cooperate to produce a $20 shirt. So that's Hayek. I changed it. There used to be this Photoshop picture of Hayek. Actually, wait, never mind. I was on the top. But there's a Photoshop picture of Hayek out there giving the middle finger. I think I know it was in the previous talk. When I did my plan does not equal your plan, that used to be Hayek flipping the bird. So he put the term into general use. And if you haven't read it, I'm going to give a plug here for Thomas Sowell. Anybody here read Knowledge and Decisions? Only one. Okay, like, great book, right? I mean, it is the best. That's how it got Sowell his position at the Hoover Institution. It is the best, like, clear, in modern language exposition of an application of Hayek's use of knowledge in society, in my opinion. And the first IHS event we went to, as an icebreaker, we had to put our favorite classical liberal name on our tag instead of our own name, and walk around and find our fellow people. And I'm sorry, what's your name? Adam. Like Adam, I was the only person with Thomas Sowell. I'm just walking around and like, oh, Rand, Milton Friedman. Huh. And it was just me and like 3 other lonely people who had nobody else. But anyway, I'm very happy. I didn't think he'd still be doing what he's doing at his age. And in that book, in a way that I didn't see when I read Hayek at the time, he really, in my view, Sowell plays out the role that the market's ultimately about coordinating knowledge. It's bringing together all that tacit knowledge that's in all of our heads together in the marketplace. Okay, long quote. We did part of this yesterday. The key thing I wanted to highlight here is not what I highlighted up there, which was about economic calculation, but in the same paragraph, it is rather a problem of how to secure the best use of resources known to any of the members of society for ends whose relative importance only these individuals know. Or to put it briefly, it is a problem of the utilization of knowledge which is not given to anyone in its totality. Somebody once asked me, how do you use economics as a dean? And without revealing too many details, I can't exactly give you the story I told them, but one of the ways is I find you have to find ways to get people to reveal their true preferences. You have to make public what is private. Because if I ask you, what would you be willing to do in this situation? Or let's say, I need you to teach another class. Would you do it for, $5,000? Like, no, they're going to say, no, $7,500. And so how you frame things to get people to reveal their true beliefs or their willingness to pay is really important, right? And in some sense, markets, this is a very James Buchanan comment. But James Buchanan, the 1986 Nobel laureate, wrote a great book called Cost and Choice. That's probably his most Austrian work. And it's a slim volume. Liberty Fund has it for $18, I think. To me, my key takeaway from that is opportunity cost is only realized at the moment of choice. And I have found that throughout to be really powerful to apply, right? Like too many times. How many of you have thought about applying for something and you thought, I'm not going to do it because X, Y, and Z reason. Things I know about that, or it caused me to move or whatever. You ever stop yourself because of what you think the situation might be? I don't even put my toe in the water on that position. I encounter that all the time. Oh, I don't want to live in Northern Virginia, right? Or I don't want that type of job. I'd much rather be in this type of job. Well, given that you have 0 job and you don't know everything about it, maybe you should apply, and ideally you have multiple offers. And I will guarantee you, when you have multiple offers sitting there, a clarity will come over your mind. Because you will have all the information you need. You've went and visited the place, you've talked to the people, you've got the vibe. I say that in a non-joking way. I had a job interview at a school that is right by my wife's family. It would have made them the happiest thing in the world. It was the worst vibes ever. And I am so glad I didn't get that offer. So there was zero possibility in the world that they would ever find out that I turned down an offer to work 5 miles from them. And instead I got offered a job I loved several states away. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone through and I didn't actually receive the offer, but I'm going to tell you, the vibes were so bad. They would have had to offer me 3 times what the offer was to actually take it. Okay. So market prices not only are spontaneous orders, there are these unintended consequences of subjective perceptions and the buying and selling their results. They're essentially knowledge surrogates, right? We don't have to know what's going on around halfway around the world. We just adjust our behavior because the price of this thing we need from halfway around the world has changed. And they transform our private knowledge. This is why prediction markets can be very, very powerful. I remember arguing with fellow economists about what was it called? The terrorism market, so-called terrorism markets. It's not that people, so what if they are using inside information? It was a way for people to make bets on their belief. Do I have a hunch? And that hunch might be right. And where does the smart money lie? Because that price that's gonna come out of that is good to tell you something. Okay, so this is the tacit knowledge points. They can't be planned. I guess in the absence of, if you try to stamp out all others, maybe Klingon would take off. Probably not. Here it's a very difficult language to learn. Okay. So this is another phrase associated with Hayek. Competition is discovery procedure. It enables us to create, discover, communicate to one another knowledge that we don't even know until of our time of choice. Right? How do we know not to squeeze bugs for lacquer? Somebody got tired of squeezing bugs and came up with a better way to do it. We need competition precisely because we're ignorant. One of the things I don't like about being a dean is you get magazines from every business school in the country, and you get the most shameless self-promotion. Outside of that, I shouldn't, this is being videotaped, but I've gotten cookie cutters in the shape of a school's logo. I've gotten power banks with the school's logo on it. And by the way, the US News World Rankings are coming out, the survey's coming out. These mild attempts to try to it's not a bribe so much as just to make you aware of who they are and what they're doing. For that reason, under our ethics law in West Virginia, I'm not even allowed to keep any, so I give that all away to students or our employees. But I also don't fill out US News and World Report because I don't think it tells you anything. We need the spontaneous or the market for economic development because it means that we're capable of coordinating greater and greater complexity as things advance. Okay? We move beyond like a simple small town where we know the baker and the brewer and everybody else to our modern societies we have today. And I don't need to trust that person. I trust the brand name, right? Or I trust Visa because I paid with my Visa card to defend my interests if something goes sideways. How are we doing on time? Okay, I'm talking fast. So if you think about a very simple example of a society, you know, we have a blacksmith, and the blacksmith, there was a line there because the blacksmith produces something for the dairy farmer, right? And the blacksmith also likes beer, so has a relationship with the brewer, right? You have these minor connections, right? If we have a barter economy, like they're just trading with one another, not utilizing money. But this would be most of society for a long period of time. We knew everybody. The real extended order is like this. You have all these different nodes. And some are very dense, right? Maybe you live in like Vail or someplace that's dense, you know, like my oldest son just graduated from Shepherd University, which is our public liberal arts college, kind of right on the Potomac at the intersection of Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. And you know, he starts in COVID. And so what are you gonna do? He's like in this dorm room by himself. He's not allowed to talk to anybody. So he just goes, and it's the poor man's colony of Williamsburg, 250-year-old houses and stuff like that. And he goes and walks the downtown, and the shopkeepers are out front because like it's COVID and nobody's out and whatever. And so he's just best friends with all, so he knows everybody. Like he's got his, you know, Shepherdstown mom, right? Who's like, yeah, if anything, you need anything. Like, okay, you have those, but you're still relying on lots of other, like that's great if you want that, right? If you want to live in Ithaca, New York, and use Ithaca bucks and only trade locally, hey, you can. Are you from Cornell? Someone's here from Cornell.
It sucks. I can tell you they have it. It's the worst system ever.
One of my students did a paper where he looked at, like, two of my students did this paper, and they said, look, here are all the arguments that they say, can we find any effect from them doing it? And they find nothing. So you want to explain to everybody, what are Ithaca bucks?
It's basically like this thing that you can like use at like, they basically created their own currency that you can use at like restaurants and stuff, but it's just like, why does it even exist?
Yeah, like, oh, well, we're going to keep these dollars circulating locally, type of thing. So by using our own currency, and people don't largely use them because the transactions costs are really high because only certain places have them. You can't trade them for dollars. They're not, yeah. So we've learned about specialization and division of labor. The real thing is the division of knowledge. There was a comedian died this year named, oh no, I'm trying to blank, not Richard Belzer. He was Jewish. Richard? Anyway, okay. He used to do a bit. It'll come to me. He used to do a bit where he said he would hate to be the guy who was frozen in ice and like thawed out in 1,000 years, because they would ask him all sorts of questions about the present day, and his answer would be like, "I don't know. There was a guy." Like, and that's his response to everything. Well, you know, you had these cars, things called cars, and these internal combustion engines. Like, how did those work? I don't know. There was a guy, he's a mechanic. and eventually be like, well, what did you actually do? Like, I stood up on a stage and I told jokes. And then I gave the money I made from that to guys to like do stuff. Yes, Adam. Not Bob Newhart. Richard, it'll come to me. He had like long black hair, shorter Jewish guy. Anyway, not Gilbert Gottfried. He died a couple of years ago. Everybody's gonna be throwing out names. There's a lot of comedians that died recently. Richard Lewis, thank you. I was thinking like that, but it sounded too much like Carl Lewis, which was thrown in. Richard Lewis. So don't you feel that way? Like I feel that, like everything is so very, if you just think about what Pete talked about, like that specialization in certain, like I do this particular type of transaction. And that's the only transaction that you can profit from because you're so into it. You can you can make money doing it. So this comes from Knowledge and Decisions. The intellectual advantage of civilization is not necessarily that each civilized man has more knowledge than his primitive ancestors, but he requires far less. Like, hey, maybe there is something to, if you ever read Shopcraft as Soulcraft, right? I like there is something on a personal level about the idea that like we do know how to do a lot of, we don't know how to do a lot of basic stuff. But my grandfather had to do that. Like they were too poor to pay somebody else to do it. Things were designed that way. They weren't as specialized. And I think that's a balance, just on a personal level, that's really a balance that's tough to figure out. Like how much do you specialize and still kind of feel like a satisfied person? So I used to have a series of pictures of different type of capital machinery here. Wish I had a Feller buncher now since I brought it up. It is pretty amazing what's going on. I just saw a debate on X where someone's like, good luck getting machines to pick blueberries. And like 2 seconds later, a guy shows this machine that's just harvesting blueberries. And it's like, well, 5 years ago there wasn't. When I was on a farm, there wasn't machines that could do that. So, but let's think about, there's still parts of the world where things are being done by hand. And that's not because they're trying to get back to nature. It's lack of access to capital or capital controls, okay? And so, I covered the Economic Freedom of the World Index. And one of the cool things that a guy named Fred McMahon, who used to run the project for the Fraser Institute, would do, they would be asked by different countries to come in and consult on which policies they could change to improve their economic freedom score, but more importantly, to improve their economic development. And things like import controls, capital controls, anything that restricts the flow of capital and technology, it cuts off everybody's ability to take advantage of all this knowledge creation elsewhere in the world. So I got these pictures. My former colleague at Beloit College, Emily Chinley Wright, wrote her dissertation on entrepreneurship among Ghanaian and Zimbabwean female entrepreneurs. And so these pictures come from her. And so this is a picture of some women making bread in what was then Rhodesia, the Shona tribe, circa 1900. Here's a picture that Emily took circa 2000. This is not I said earlier, I played recreationist baseball. It's a place called Ohio Village in Columbus, 1860. There's nothing there that's post-1860. This isn't play acting. All right, this is because, Zimbabwe, I think, is, 157 on the EFW. If we think about those nodes, it's just disconnected from the rest of the world. So, as a matter of policy, we need to bring as much rich knowledge to bear in West Virginia, in large parts of the developing world. Like, look, my state has not been at 80% of US national income in the last 30 years. And we're the oldest state in the country. Normally, wealth and income's higher as you're older. And you might say, okay, yeah, we're integrating the US market, but not in many real ways. We're not. Happy to talk about that more. Oops, sorry. That was my last slide. But the larger point I want to make is think about this, before we turn to questions, think about this in the context of Alexander's talk. What is building a network, but building these nodes and opportunities? Like, I didn't even know half of what he was involved in. And while he's talking, I'm sending him like emails saying, how can we do that? And it's very hard. I am an introvert. As I said the other day, it's hard for me to manifest things. But one thing but anyway, it creates a lot of these nodes for yourself and a lot of opportunities for you to find a way to create value for others. Now that might be, I know several of you in grad school, that might be academia, that might be in the business world. But the more you get out there, the more you expose yourself to different ideas, different businesses, different applications, you'll find a way to create, value for others. Okay. Questions, comments, cat calls. Okay. And again, maybe that was, for those of you who read my pencil, very straightforward. Happy to talk about anything else. Yes?
What are the forces that are holding back West Virginia from developing as an economy?
Oh, great question. Well, I'll make Bill shut the video off at this point. No, I'm just joking. But seriously, I won't. There is a long populist streak in the state that distrusts outsiders. And so it's not a stark policy like maybe import, export control, but we don't like, because there's this view that, out-of-staters came in, coal companies came and extracted all of our natural resources, and therefore we have to not really, we don't have to trade with outsiders. There's a little bit too much of, well, let's do everything ourselves. It's not easy to do it's not easy to build. It's almost entirely mountains. And so the cost of development, so even if you think about, I don't know if you drove here, if those of you who drove here, you probably passed a lot of distribution centers. Right, if you're Eastern PA, tons of distribution centers. There's very few flat buildable lots. Like it's hard to have like the easy development. I did a book called I co-edited a book called Unleashing Capitalism in West Virginia. And it was really about trying to highlight How are policies? It's free. It's completely free. You can find it on my co-author's website, Russ Sobel, Sobel. And the cover of each chapter is a map of Google, like a Google image from the Google satellite of the border of West Virginia, one of its neighboring states, where all the development is on the other side. And my favorite, I think it's chapter 3, is an area of I think it's the Maryland-West Virginia border. Might be PA. But it's the Mead West Vaco Company. You probably all have used Mead products, Mead paper. But the full name is Mead West Vaco, emerged with the West Virginia Paper Company. So you might ask yourself, why is the West Virginia company producing paper not in West Virginia, with West Virginia trees? And it's because West Virginia is the only state, at least at that time the factory was built, that had an inventory tax. Well, think about the production. An inventory tax taxes you on how much inventory you've built up. Like literally, we're going to go into a warehouse, count stuff, here's your tax. Well, you're a Mead. You're producing paper. When do you sell most of your paper? Back to school time. So what do? To smooth production, you build up inventory in your warehouses. Well, are you going to do that in West Virginia, given that it has an inventory tax? So you combine that with the legal system. I gave you an example of that in my earlier talk with a judge saying, anytime I can rule for an out-of-state for in-state plaintiff versus an out-of-state company, I'll do that. It makes it a very inhospitable business environment. So kind of Mother Nature strike against us and the other ones. So it's frustrating. Now things are getting better in many respects. Many of the worst things have been changed. But now you just have to deal with all the other things like bad terrain and cost of building. Yes?
So I'm from Brazil, and as a Latin American citizen, we struggle a lot with like government cutting off our wings, restricting businesses and like government like pushing like the citizens and not allowing businesses to grow. What do you think it would be a good solution, or maybe like a good solution that like businesses in Latin America could grow more and like create those connections and start a more similar economy based in free market?
Yeah, I think this issue of what you're kind of arguing, what can be the policy, who are the policy entrepreneurs, right? And so much of that's contextual, because I find that what you have is you have to have a deep knowledge. Sometimes it's a deep knowledge of the political forces at play. So we have a center at WVU. It's called the KNEE, K-N-E-E, Regulatory Research Center. It's not a body part. It's a family name that was one of the original donors. And they used to start off with what's called occupational regulation. So they looked at like licensure of nurse practitioners, of some states in the US regulate people who braid hair. And all they did were looking at differences across states. And that became a very powerful tool to just present to legislators and say, do you know we have so I'll give you an example. West Virginia has the largest number of steps, at least at one time, and total cost to become a barber. You had to take 4 exams. You had to pay a $900 fee. You had to do like a year of apprenticeship under another barber to cut hair. And all we did was point out, hey, we're an outlier here. Or another one would be nurse practitioners. In the US, many nurse practitioners are military spouses. And military folks in the US move a lot. Well, every state has different licensure and they don't necessarily recognize it. So at a time where we have a nurse practitioner shortage, their data was already out there and they could say, look, we have a solution to this problem. There's all these military spouses who are trained as nurse practitioners, and when they family moved, they didn't want to go through licensure again, and so they're like, I'll just stay home and raise my kids, but they could go back in the marketplace if you had what's called universal recognition. So I'm a big believer in, Alexander said, you don't change people's minds by arguing. I think you don't change policy by making the case at the moment. I think you make the case and it's just out there, and when the time is right, somebody says there's some sort of problem. Like right now we have that nurse practitioner problem in the US, and their research was out there showing here's a solution to a problem that didn't exist at the time but now is acute. And that is much more powerful than, hey, why don't we do this at the time? So I don't think that's an silver bullet as an answer, but I think I think that's, if you look, that's how things get done. Yes, here, and then there. Yeah.
So beyond waiting for policy, because it seems like, right, there's two forms of solutions just looking at this image.
Yeah.
There's the inside breaking out and there's the outside breaking in. So being from a place that, like, for example, if we're going to compare Latin America with the United States, being from that large network in the United States and trying to break into these markets in South America, how can we do that? How can we extend our knowledge to them to try and bridge that gap from the outside in?
Yeah, that is a great question. I mean, I know in a Cold War sense, like Radio Free Europe and all that. It's hard. I don't know. I'll have to mull that. I mean, that's a hard question, right? Because like, how do you? I'm not a big fan of trying to use, bilateral trade or things to like. But that is, I mean, people hate. I shouldn't say people. I have run into a lot of classical liberals who hate, like the EU or Mercosur, like any sort of agreement. But most of the work I've seen shows that it did liberalize things. Now, you can always point to some things that did less liberalization. But generally speaking, they liberalized some things. Yeah, I think that's unfortunately the only, from a real like substantive policy kind of change. And I also think, I mean, we're terrible. I think you change that through, many of you are here learning, like the US, one of the great exports we had was higher ed, right? And OPT and everything that came from like people come to the US to study. And all we've done is make that very difficult to do. And I hope that changes. So yeah, that's my unsatisfying answer. Yes?
Yeah, I guess that was a good one. So what I would say, it kind of stems into my question. So in my country, there was the ruling government actually campaigned on the one district, one factory thing, which was meant to be to kind of push the private sector coming in. So if you have an idea, the government can actually just grant a collateral for you to get a big loan as a startup capital to start up something, and then it grows like that. But the unfortunate thing was, like, because of the picture we're seeing now, you're cut off of the external world in terms of market size. So one, your cost of production, because you're going to produce on a large scale, it's going to be way higher compared to other parts of the world. So it's easier for someone, a consumer within the country, to just want to rather import, to use them than to patronize what you are actually giving up. So it became very difficult for that to come out. And then everything just went down again. So my question was actually because there is this cut off now, how is it going to be possible to kind of, because for starters, you would need to produce at the least cost to be able to match up the international level of. So if I'm able to produce and want to extend it outwards, I should be competitive in price, which I can't in this scenario. And with what he was saying, I think it ties into that exporting the kind of ideas onto this part of the world also has its problem in terms of the regulations, the government regulations there. It kills it. It becomes not lucrative, not profitable, in the sense that it's not competitive. You cannot have competitive prices there. So how I can't realize within this and wants to break out, within that sphere that wants to break out, how is it going to be possible to kind of, okay, let's practice private sector capitalism like the companies spring up, knowing that you're still going to produce at a very high cost, you cannot be competitive on the international market and everything like that.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I guess I don't know if you can't be. Now, you might not. Maybe there's enough internal regulations and things which increase your costs. But I guess I would say that we all have our place in the world. Let's just think about individuals. And yes, there are people that have an absolute advantage in certain skills and things, but we all have something to give back and provide and value in terms of other folks. And I guess it's more of a belief in people that if freed to be able to produce or provide goods they think they can provide at a certain cost, they'll be able to do that. We'll get back here and they'll come here. Yeah, I got 5 minutes left. Yep, and then there.
I just want to say I appreciate your comment about policy. I happen to agree with it, that it's not a bunch of rational planners making a policy top-down by selecting the most rational policy and implementing it. It's really solutions going and searching problems by policy entrepreneurs, and I think that's John Kingdon's argument. And I think he does a really good job with that. And thank you for bringing it up, because what it did spur in my mind is the idea is, okay, even if it is solutions going in search of problems, they might use rational choice methods. That's not the same thing as using rational choice methods for a rational plan. I just wanted to make that distinction.
Thank you. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I went to Nashville a while ago, and we met with this organization called the Beacon Center.
Yeah.
What they do is they go after government red tape, pretty much. And one of the policies they went after was there's an ordinance policy where if politicians in the area wanted to put something into effect, a new regulation in effect, they didn't have to vote on it. And then, so for example, what they did was they put a complete ban on Airbnb for Nashville. And that like ruined people because that was some of their only income. And then a year later, the Beacon Center, they did a bunch of lobbying, went after them, and then they voted on it and got it repealed, that whole ordinance thing. So they couldn't just do that. So I guess my question for you would be, to fix something like this, is it an entrepreneur problem or is it a red tape problem? In the sense of, I guess it was kind of like what Marcos was saying earlier, like how do you go about fixing something like this, or is it a very specific per each scenario?
Thank you for, I can't remember the exact, I think that's a great, I'm glad you restated that in that context, because it reminded me of a book by Leonard Read, who's a development economist. Let's just say he is not a classical liberal. But he wrote a book called One Economics, Many Recipes. And one of the chapters in that talks about, I forget the country now. For some reason I want to say Honduras, but it was not Honduras. But basically they create a special export zone. And they said they were trying to increase women's labor supply. And in that export zone, politically, in order to get the export zone, they would say, this will only women can work in the export zone, because politically that made male voters okay with it, right? And over time, women became a large enough economic force that changed all policy. You know, it changed. So you need to find like that beachhead where people have, where you suddenly you can change the kind of political dynamics. Another example that always comes to mind is with charter schools in Ohio. Ohio, when they passed their charter school law, it was we need to fix education in the Big Eight, our major cities. And the legislation said that charter schools could only open in the Big Eight districts, only in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Akron, Canton, right, Youngstown. It didn't say, though, only children in those districts could go to those schools. The mechanism was anybody who signed up, the state dollars would follow them. So what happened was all these schools opened on the edges of the big cities. And suddenly these suburban kids whose family were dissatisfied with their education started going there. And by the time the school districts figured this out, because the money was being drained as the money followed the students, and they went to stop it, suddenly there's all these parents who are happy with their charter schools their kids are going to, and they're an organized group to stop it. So I don't want to say you need to fight faction with faction, but in many cases, that's where success comes from. You come with a nose under the camel's tent. Yes, and last question.
Quick question. You mentioned that some classical liberals hated Mercosur and the EU and NAFTA. What is there to hate if those promote free trade? And thank you for your presentation. I have enjoyed all three sessions.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know the EU context the best, but remember when I said in my economic freedom talk that certain things are really salient to folks, right? Like, again, if you're 20 and you're going to be conscripted, very important to you. Regulation tends to be a big thing with a lot of European classical liberals. And depending on what country, when you harmonized in order to ascend to the EU, in some case that was a leveling up as well as a leveling down in regulation. Now, especially for the countries that joined the monetary union, like that in itself, that's like dollarizing. Like, you know, it stopped a lot of bad things. And so if you look at, I wrote a paper, not causal in any way, but just kind of looking at what happened. Countries that joined just joined the EU but did not join the monetary union, I can't tell if there's any change in economic freedom. Those that joined the monetary union, big change. But it's almost all in monetary policy. They needed to like bind their hands to the mast, as it were, to say like, look, I'm not going to inflate. We're just going to follow the European Central Bank. And so that's the pushback I get is people who are not they don't care about the big picture per se, or they're in one of the ones that didn't join the monetary union, and then it's a mixed bag, right? Yeah, we had to get rid of some agricultural subsidies, but we have some higher other regulations, and they don't like giving up. They may be classical liberal, but they're very national sovereign, and so giving up something to Brussels is a big, thing that makes them angry. Yeah, but great question. Okay, I am out of time. Thank you all very much.